It is so good to see you all on here. I know that many of you are probably like me or a little overwhelmed today with just the the COVID world that we are in. I don't know what your school districts are like, but we have over almost 100 students now that we have at home, and we're only about a school of 400. So, and we have 12 staff members, 3 of which I've sent home today. So it's been quite the challenge today, but I am very excited to be on here with you. So I am going to start sharing my screen. I have a presentation that I've normally done in about an hour, and I'm going to condense it down today for the time limits of this session. But I hope that my goal is for you to hear something that you can take back and directly use with your students. I know that so many of us are aware of what trauma is. We know it affects our students, but I feel like often we've not been told what to do. It's been all awareness, but then you leave thinking, okay, well, now what? And so I'm going to be speaking to you today from personal experience. This is my son. His name is Jackson.
He's so handsome.
Yeah, thank you. He's in the 6th grade, and he was adopted from China when he was almost 3. And he has a disorder called reactive attachment disorder, which is a mental health condition that is results of trauma that he experienced in his young life and his early years. And so my experience as a mother and the things that we have been through with him has really shaped me as an educator. And I hope that I can share some things today that will help you as well. So I am going to hopefully click on the correct thing here. So let me, it's right in my way. Hold on. Can you, every time I try to click, it's right, but this little bar is in the way, but you still should be able to see. Okay. Can you see the presentation? Yes. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Now, like I said, my husband had hoped to be on here with me. I am an elementary assistant principal at Creekside Elementary in Sonora, Kentucky. That's in the southern tip of Hardin County. And my husband is a high school teacher at Elizabethtown High School. And I like for him to join me, but unfortunately, he is trying to cover his teammates today. So we're just being flexible. But I just want to jump in. As I said, I want to give you a face today for the word trauma. I mean, I know you have faces that you can think of immediately, but sometimes I think that all educators have moments of being guilty of seeing a child and just automatically judging that child's story. Well, sometimes we do it without even realizing that we are doing it. And so today I want to give you the story of a student that might come to school and look a certain part and look like a healthy, attached child from a loving, supportive family. But I want you to know the backstory of that situation to help you. And so this is my son. When he was 2, we adopted him when he was a little bit closer to 3. This was one of the first pictures we saw of him. He was born with a cleft lip and palate in China, so he was abandoned by his family when he was about a week old and left on the steps of a building in a box. And then he lived in 4 different home environments until we adopted him and brought him to the United States. And then you can see when I first made this presentation, he was 11, but he just turned 12 recently. So this is a picture of him and his sister, who is my biological daughter. And Jackson, when we adopted him, like I said, he has some physical disabilities, and he's probably had about 6 surgeries since being in the United States to rebuild his lip, his palate, and his nose. And what we did not know, though, we did not know the magnitude of some of his mental health issues that would start to come out. So something that's interesting is that when he was much smaller, a lot of the things that he was struggling with, we attributed to like adjustment to culture or adjustment to our home and that sort of thing. And actually it's around age 6 that a lot of attachment disorders and a lot of mental health, a lot of trauma disorders start to really come to the forefront for a child. And that was definitely the case for us. When he was in kindergarten, we started to have so many struggles. It got to the point where he was threatening to harm himself. He was discussing how at 6 years old, how he was going to kill us. He tried to set our house on fire at one point in time. I could not go to Target. I would pick him up from school and have to go straight home And we would have to tag team errands because if I took him anywhere in public, he would run away, or he would tell people that I wasn't his mother and that I had kidnapped him, and would throw the most horrific fits in front of many, many people, and a lot of people that I knew. So there were a lot of layers to his issues. He would go to school, and for the most part, at the beginning of the year, he did pretty well at school. He was very hyperactive and very disruptive at times. But then as the school year progressed, he really struggled with those relationships as well. So it got to the point where he has had to be hospitalized a few times. As recently as right before the pandemic started in 2020, we were in a pretty bad place at that point as well. So he has been through a lot, and we have also as a family been through a lot. Trauma disorders in a child often cause anxiety disorders and subsequent types of issues for the parents as well. And that's something I'm going to talk about today. So I say all of that not to draw any kind of sympathy for the situation at all, but I want to let you know that I understand where not only you're coming from as an educator, because I have the students that I work with, but I'm also understanding what it's like to mother and to live 24/7 a situation where you have to lock your other child in the room at night for their own safety, or where you wonder, like, what is going to happen? How are we going to make it through the next day? So the good news is that we have come a long way over these years, almost 10 years in April that we have adopted him. And particularly the last two have been really great. And so I would attribute that to the things that we have learned. So real quickly, I know you already know this. I'm not going to read any of this to you. And some of these slides I'm going to skip over, but I have linked them on the grid. You can access the file. But trauma is so many things. You can see all of these here. So sometimes we think it's got to be like one really significant, terrible event, but it doesn't have to be. It can even just be prolonged stress or medical trauma, incarceration of a family member, poverty, all of the things that you can see here. You know, many years ago in the late 90s, this term adverse childhood experiences, we call it ACEs, kind of became coined and was used a lot by the CDC to be able to start evaluating how chronic stress was affecting children. And so we use phrases like ACEs and toxic stress to talk about these kiddos. There's a lot of different trauma disorders that are related to the things that I just mentioned and that you saw on that slide. These are just some of them, but we see kids that have PTSD, kids that have what my son has, RAD, reactive attachment disorder, where they don't bond to adults. They don't trust people. They push everyone away. We have children that have what's called adjustment disorders and then developmental delays as well. And you know as well as I do that their behavior and the things that they're experiencing, the way that they are perceiving the world and they're functioning in the world is obviously affecting them at school. And not just their academics, but also just their ability to control themselves, their anger, their anxiety, in their body systems. And for my son, something that floored me at one point when we went to a doctor was how it was affecting him medically. The level of anxiety and the state that he was functioning in, like in fight or flight mode, like 90% of the time, was actually affecting his health in different ways. I'm going to skip through this, but you're welcome to come back and read this. It just gives you a little background of how this whole trauma-informed reform came to be. It's a fairly new thing in the field of education. And so there's a lot of different things that led to this, including the justice movement, an increase in school violence, a pairing of the education world and the medical world. All these things have come together because this was not something that you heard of 30 years ago. Even 24 years ago when I was in college, we didn't discuss this in my college preparation classes. And I don't know how many of you have had much experience. I know now I think they're doing a better job, but I did not go into my first year of teaching having any awareness of this other than I knew there were kids from troubled backgrounds. And I wish I could go back to some of those early students. Something that is really alarming, this statistic was from 2012. So I know that it would be much higher now, especially because of the pandemic. But in 2012, they were able to determine that 50% of students in today's public schools have been impacted by trauma. So this is not just a tiny percentage of the students or just your behavior kids that you're dealing with on a daily basis. This is almost half your student body has endured trauma at some point. And so it really, really compels us to think about how we are handling not just behavior, but just relationships in general in our schools. And again, I'm going to go through quickly some things to get to the good stuff, but you can see just some of the things that trauma impacts. Again, not just their cognitive ability, but it causes difficulties with relationships at school and peer relationships, teacher relationships, memory. It's difficult to remember, language delays, and just a reduction in their capacity to learn in general. All of those things are affected by these adverse childhood experiences. And so I want you to think today, I want you to think about driving down the road and you come upon like a traffic jam or a wreck or something that is going to delay you. And most people, most of us will come upon that situation. And at first we might be like really frustrated, like, oh, good grief, I've got to be somewhere. And now how long am I going to sit here? But eventually, usually quickly for an adult with a healthy brain, we can sit there and kind of rationalize, okay, well, this is a wreck. I can't do anything about it. I can't help the situation. And you start to think through alternatives in your mind, like, okay, can I go a different route? Or can I sit here and think on something else? Or let me make that phone call I need to make. And you kind of work your way through that. Now I want you to imagine that you pull up and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I have to do? Why do I have to wait? I'm getting so angry, and your blood pressure is rising and you're physically, shaking or getting red and upset. And that continues on the entire time you're waiting. That feeling is what a kid with a trauma brain, what they feel like when they're upset. And some of them, what they feel like on a daily basis. They have no ability to shift their brain from, this is annoying, to, okay, well, I'm just stuck here. I can deal with this. They're stuck. Eric Jensen writes about this in some of his books. They just get stuck in that angry, irritated space and they cannot shift out of it. So it's our job as educators to help teach them how to regulate that. And a lot of this starts so young. I know when you look at this picture of my son and you think, okay, he's lived with us for almost 10 years in April. We adopted him in April of 2012. How is what happened to him his first 2.5 years still affecting him? But it's so much of it has to do with what they missed out on. And so if that, if a child, even as a baby, is separated from their biological mother and they are no longer hearing that heartbeat and that voice and the smells and the things that they had even grown accustomed to in the womb, that is traumatic to the brain. If they've had lots of surgeries or they've had a traumatic event like being abandoned or moving around or being thrown into different environments many different times, that is traumatic for the brain, and it affects the brain as it is developing. And so I've had family members even say to me, well, he can't possibly remember. If I had him for a weekend, I'd straighten him up. Which you all know as educators that's just comical. But my point is that whatever happened and whatever they endured in those first few months of life really affects them and their ability to regulate themselves as they go. And so what I want to get to, I'm going to skip some of this, but you can go back and read yourself. I want to get into some strategies on what you can do. Like I said, I have learned so much as a mother, and I have learned so much on how I can apply that to my students. I was a teacher for the last 19 years, and then this is my first year in administration. And so I have had students in my classroom day in and day out with trauma disorders. And then this year I've been working a lot with our PBIS students and working to support our kiddos here who have endured some of these similar types of things. So the first thing that I have to share is that you have to stay positive. And I know that is so hard. And there are some days that we all do that better than others. And I know I particularly don't always do that well as a mother, but you have to have hope that these kids can improve. And you have to have hope that you matter to them, that even if they're pushing you away. And one of the most important things I learned with my son is that I have been the biggest brunt of his anger and his inability to attach. And so I'm the one that he routinely has spit on or hit, or he tried to stab me with a knife one time and we had to involve the police before he was in the hospital. I'm the one that he frequently calls bad names and things that we don't talk that way to him. Like, it's just things that we've had to endure because he wants to have that relationship so badly with me, but his body and his brain tell him like all these red flags, like, don't trust her, she's not really going to stick around. So you have to have hope that things can get better, because the moment that you don't, the moment that it all starts to unravel. And something that I started doing in my classroom, and then I've continued with my students this year in this role, is actually teaching students character strengths. I like to use literature and like look at like simple little stories, look at your Aesop's fables and even some of your fairy tales, and look at what character strengths did some of these book characters go through to overcome a situation, or if something was challenging for them, what did they do? And helping your students to recognize those in another character and then thinking on how they can apply that to themselves. You have to teach and model growth mindset. We have seen many therapists through the years with my son, many, and that was one of the resounding things that is common, even though they've all had kind of different approaches, is teach him that he can change, he can get better, and acknowledging what his struggles are, and then how do we move forward. And so I use a lot of goal setting with him. I use a lot of goal setting with my students, celebrating those small victories, giving them frequent feedback. Something that I do, I have about 13, 14 students that I regularly check in and check out with. And then of those, I have 5 that I would consider my trauma kids that are more intense. And one of the things that I do with those students is I have frequent breaks throughout the day set up. I have a chart for them, and they come in and come out of my office, and we check in, we check out, and we say, okay, you made it an hour and a half. Great. And we celebrate, and I'll sit and play with them for a minute. So much of it is about relationship, about me taking the time out of my day to sit with my son, to sit with my students, and give them that 2 minutes, that 3 minutes, one-on-one, making them interact with me. A lot of these kids want to push adults away, and they don't want that interaction, and they'd rather just sit and play a puzzle in the corner of the room. But you want that reward time to be you giving them feedback, you talking about strategies that they've used, and celebrating along with them. Like I mentioned, I do use literature a lot with my students, which is a great, little educational extra in there for them as well. But I really like to take the time to help them see that just because life has been hard doesn't mean it always has to be. And they really have to be explicitly taught that. Another thing is to build student choice into your discipline, particularly as administrators. Talk to your students up front about what consequences might be. Sit and discuss with them. One of the things that I have learned from my older students that I work with and with my son is they want to be heard. We did a survey of our students recently, and one of the things that came up so frequently was kids said, when I'm in trouble, I want to talk. Let me speak. Let me explain. And so something that I've been trying to do, like when I have a situation with several students, and particularly I know that some of them are coming from traumatic backgrounds, is get them in a circle, literally in my office, and we sit and I let them have a voice, let the teacher speak, let another child involved speak, but let them talk. And often as we talk, we find out, hey, they were having a bad day because their mom showed up at the house to take something the night before and didn't even tell them goodbye and left them with some family member. And that's why they're acting like a pain today. So sometimes just those conversations, it helps that child have a voice, and it helps you to understand where they're coming from. Another thing that I do with my son and with all my students is demanding excellence. And, even though they have, I've never allowed anyone to make excuses for my son. And that's a hard balance because we've had some teachers that he's had through the years that we've had to have some really hard conversations with, because he is a very reactive child. And if he feels very insecure most of the time, that nobody likes him and that his teachers don't like him. And so he's had episodes of running out of classrooms and hiding under desks and like truly, shaking because he feels so hated by others. And so you have to find that hard balance of the teacher building a relationship with him, even if he's acting like he doesn't want it and pushes it away, but then also that expecting out of that teacher that they're going to hold him accountable and do that in a loving, very nurturing way, but not letting him bow with things. You never want to just be like, oh, I just feel so sorry for them. Never. And so you definitely want to have those high expectations. It is not ever helping this demographic of students to lower those standards. We just have to scaffold them towards success. Their level of expectation may not look like another student in your class. You've got to help them get there, but you certainly don't just lower the bar. A big thing that educators and parents with kiddos that are struggling from trauma backgrounds has to do is learn to manage their own response. And this is huge. And this is where I see a lot of teachers as an administrator struggle. They're not managing their own response to the student, and so they are making it so much worse. You can change these children's brains. It is possible, but it is not going to be a very quick process. they project a lot of their own trauma onto their caregivers, onto their teachers. And so teachers have to recognize the trauma and not the reaction. And I have told that to some of my teachers this year is just remember, you have to understand they're operating, most of these trauma kids are operating from the fight or flight, which is the back of the brain. And that's because this part that's more rational and thinking, the front part has been underdeveloped from the trauma, from lack of nutrition, from just the poverty, the environment, all the different things, whatever they've experienced. This part is where, when you look at scans of kiddos who have been through traumatic experiences, this is the part of the brain that gets underdeveloped. And when you look at and comparing those brains, this is where you see a breakdown. And so these kids are operating in that fight or flight like you would in a panic moment all of the time. And so teachers have to learn to not take the reactions of these kiddos personal and to not react with them. And that's the biggest struggle that I see today when I have talked to teachers or observed teachers in schools, is that a lot of the teachers are wanting to get in there and get in an argument with the kid. And this is where it's so important that you have a system for, if it's PBIS or if it's just a trauma plan for your school, that you have a school-wide plan and that plan is implemented and monitored throughout the whole building. Because what does not work for these kids is for my son Jackson to have a great experience in first and second grade, and then he goes to third grade to a teacher who is not applying any of the same strategies or tools and has completely different classroom management approach and expectations. And then he goes to fourth grade and has a different experience. And that's literally what has happened to us. We had a couple of great years and then a couple of not so great years. And it was really hard to overcome those as a parent. So you can imagine your children who don't have a parent at home that are trying and working with them, and they're going through, well, I've got a pretty trauma-informed teacher one year and then one that is not the next year. We're not going to be helping these kids improve. And our goal is to help heal them and help change them, not to correct them and not to fix them, but to help them heal and to help them grow. And so I'm going to share with you something today that I have learned that has worked not only with my own son, but with some of my kiddos even this year. And so I'm hoping this is one of those takeaways that you can take back to your school that you can use. And so this was a tool that I learned. We actually went to Florida to a speaker who came from Colorado, who's one of the leading trauma specialists. And our family lived with her and some of her specialists for 7 days at a camp environment. And we learned a lot of different tools and strategies. And so one of the things is my son used to just melt down a lot, like big blow up, throw himself in the floor, or very destructive, breaking things and hurting things in that situation. So what we use is called a 3BI intervention. And I actually used it with him last night. And so what you do, the first thing is, if your child or your student is completely out of control, first you check yourself, and you literally have to kind of have a little mental conversation. Okay, I'm not going to react in this situation. I'm going to stay calm because this child wants me to join their chaos. They want me to be upset. And so you check yourself and you go into it from a loving place. And then you do something to shift that child's brain. For my son, we do something called a strong sit. I'm going to see if I can lower my camera here a bit. Let's go back here a little bit so you can see. But last night he was really keyed up and he was just very antsy and very irritable. And so he sits cross-legged, like crisscross applesauce. Take your hands, it's a cross-lateral movement. You turn them in like this and then twist in. And then he has to sit for 30 seconds, completely still, breathing calm. And sometimes it takes me 20, 30 minutes to get him to do that. And so you literally just sit there and say, when you do your 30 seconds, then we will stop. Or your 30 seconds starts when you are calm. In the beginning, when we tried this, he destroyed my living room, broke things, turned things over. The therapist kept saying, stick with it. So we started removing things from our room. I've done this with some students this year. I take them to an empty space that has nothing that they can destroy. And usually the children throw themselves around the room, against the wall, flop around until they realize, I'm not giving in. I'm not going anywhere. They're going to do this. And so they sit and they breathe. They do their 30 seconds. And then I say, okay, get up. And the child holds my hand and I look at them and I say, what happened? And so either they tell me what happened in the classroom, or my son tells me, like last night, he said, I was just being really wild. And I'm like, okay, yes, you were. And then I don't lecture. I don't go on and talk about why, like I used to, but now I've learned you don't do that. It's just a quick, okay, well, what are you going to do as an act of kindness? So like for me, he had to do something for me last night in the classroom. It might be going to go back and do something for your other students or for your teacher, or you're going to sweep up the mess you made or whatever it was. If you turned your desk over, you're going to go clean it up. And this is a conversation I've had with the teachers, that like they have to come in and have some kind of act of restitution or kindness. And then literally we high five or we hug and we say, okay, we've learned from this and we're going to move on. Because what I have learned, and if you learn anything today, I want you to understand that these children will not learn to change behavior in this moment or in the heat of these traumatic brains coming out. They're not going to respond to you. They're not going to improve. They have to get calm, and then you can instruct, and you can use social skills, or you can use a teachable moment later, but you can never change their behavior permanently in the heat of that moment. So yelling and harsh punishments, suspensions, all of those things, there's so much research to prove that those do not change the behavior for these children. Relationship, teaching them how to calm down, those are the things that do. And so I had a student I've been working with for a while. I'm actually meeting with his parents today, and it's been a struggle with his behavior a lot, and we're working through it. But I was so excited the other day because in the heat of the moment of him throwing himself around in here and destroying things, he said, wait, let me do my breathing. And he did his little candle breathing and he calmed himself down. And so it's not going to fix overnight, but these strategies do work. And I love at the end that it's a restitution. It's, hey, I'm so proud of you. We got your, we got you calm. We're going to move forward, and we don't dwell upon the negative behavior. We move forward with how we're going to change the brain. And the last thing that I want to share with you is I really encourage you to think about the parents that you deal with, that you have to call or that you have to sit and meet with. Some of these parents are responsible for the children's trauma. I'm aware of that, but some of them are not. And some of them are enduring trauma themselves. And we don't always know their stories. And please give them the space to listen to them and respect their own trauma that they may have endured or they may be experiencing currently, and communicate well with them. They want to know, and they want to hear, the things that are happening, but they also want to hear the positives too. And I know I was in a situation with my child at one point where basically they just said that well, your child's just, a bad kid. And we're just frustrated with him. We don't know what else to do with him. And they made me feel like it was my fault, or that my husband and I weren't doing enough, or would say things like, have you ever, even thought about spanking him? As if we hadn't thought of all the different things that we could do. And so give them that respect and that space as well. And so I've got some books there too that I would reference, that I would suggest as well. But I know this is such a short session, time goes so fast. But I hope that today, if anything, helped you to think about relationship and think about taking time to slow down with these kiddos and try to get to know their stories, try to understand what happened to them, and not judge their behavior and make a decision about them that's permanent. When we look at so much research, there are so many students sitting in prisons right now who all the way through school were labeled the bad kid, or they were just frequently suspended or punished, and none of that is going to change and turn their lives around. But we have opportunities as educators to do that, but it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes a whole lot of love and a lot of understanding. And so I hope that you gathered some things today that might help. If you don't do anything, I would suggest trying the 3BI strategy. You can Google that. There's a lot of information. Her name's Nancy Thomas. She has fostered over 100 students with significant trauma disorders in her home and has been very successful with them. So this is the main strategy that has worked with my son and has completely changed our home life and made things so much better for him at school. And he's a straight A student in middle school right now, which is unheard of for that situation. But I just wish you the best of luck with the students that you're working with. And I know just by your presence here today that they're lucky students out there. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer, or you can type in the chat, or you're welcome to email me. I'm going to put my email in here, and you can feel free to email me. Like I said, I usually have a much longer presentation with a little bit more information, but I appreciate you coming. And so I am finished unless, like I said, unless you have a question, but I hope you have a great day.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura Beth Hayes. Thank you very, very much. And we're out of time. Please, if you have questions, go ahead and email her directly. She's with Hardin County Schools.
And yes, someone just absolutely, you can steal anything you want from this presentation. I've had a few other administrators from some other districts just use it, and you can put your name, like, totally fine, because
One of the
I
comments,
would love for people to
one
have
of
it.
the
So yes.
comments said, your presentation was so good.
Oh.
I have worked quite a lot on ACEs with many staff, with my staff. I would like to show this presentation to my staff. And this was from let's see, Monica let's see, Boggess, Monica. But her comment in the chat indicated just what we all felt. Your presentation was excellent.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, you can feel free to use it, Monica.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.